This is Marketing Uncomplicated. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I have Paula Bruno with me, and I wanted to do a quick introduction. Paula Bruno is the CEO of Intuition Media Group, a full-service influencer marketing agency established in 2008. With over 15 years of experience in the industry, Paula has been at the forefront of influencer marketing since its inception. This is going to be a great conversation because the world of the influencer stage has changed dramatically, and it's going to keep changing. Helping shape the framework for influencer compensation and collaborations, which is so key because that's also a piece of the influencer marketing that has truly evolved. Prior to founding Intuition Media Group, she helped build and take public a company in the equipment rental space through acquisitions. Her agency has worked with major brands like Canon USA, Hyundai, TikTok, GoDaddy, and has managed over 750 projects, resulting in 3 billion impressions. This is incredible. Welcome to the show, Paula.
Thank you so much. It's great being here.
Yes, so very excited. So tell us a little bit of how you got involved in the influencer space, because I always think that this is key, how somebody steps into something that they're doing, and then the build out of, what was the gap in the market to kind of, push the product and service through.
I got started when I had worked in a male-dominated field prior to this, and I took a little bit of time off when I had my children, and during that 5 years or so, I was trying to figure out where I should pivot and what looked exciting to me. And at that time, I was in an angel investing group, and we were looking at all different companies, and this is when the internet was really starting to bubble up. And I was introduced to someone who was the CMO, who had been the CMO at Sony, and we got to talking. And she had developed. She was starting to develop a company based around the thoughts of women audiences, because she found, and I found, trying to find women audiences, especially for artists in her case and different brands and products in my case. It was just something that we both felt really passionate about. My passion was all about women entrepreneurs, and hers was all about finding, those women audiences. So that's really, how we started back then.
Yeah, that's incredible. So let's kind of dig in a little deep. Let's talk about what really started influencer marketing, and what was the beginning of influencer marketing?
Oh my gosh. The beginning was Twitter parties, everybody following a hashtag on Twitter. Yeah. There was no Instagram. There was no, video. It was only the written word. So It was bloggers. There was a lot of blogging content. We hosted the second women's largest blogging conference in the United States from 2009 through 2013. Then we held our final show in 2019. And so way back when it started, back in 2008, 2009, it was really all about writing. It was about bloggers.
They were the first influencers.
Yep. Blog content.
Yeah. That's incredible. And if some of you remember any of the folks that are on this call, I mean, the Twitter parties were, where it was in terms of getting your updates and your information and so on. So how did it evolve post then? I mean, was Instagram the stage that made it change? Because I don't think I remember when Instagram first launched that, you did sort of see influencers pop up. I think it took a while, correct?
It took a little while, but we really started seeing the market, the brands and the agencies in the marketplace they had been on blogs, but then, everybody was when Instagram rolled out, everybody was trying to figure out what the play was there. How can we, get a share of that voice? What is it that we have to do? So that's when we started working we had a network of influencers. We had about 20,000 influencers that had opted in. Most of them were bloggers, but they had opted in, and little by little, they were transitioning to not only having blogs, but to having Instagram that, really was second nature to their blog. So then when we would work with brands or agencies, they would want to also test out Instagram. And then it became full blown.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think do you think that the audiences, just kind of like adapted to what was happening and how it was changing? Or do you think that there was an educational moment, as in like, not to say like, okay, these are people who are going to be influencing brands and so on and so forth. It's almost like how the like modeling industry kind of changed from like the Claudia Schiffer days, right? Where they were like the supermodels, and then all of a sudden everybody could have been a model and they were on the cover of Vogue, right?
Right.
So was there sort of just this smooth movement into, oh, okay, this random person who lives in, Connecticut, is, growing their following and becoming an influencer? Or do you think that there was like an educational portion to it? Like build that
Um,
trust really with the unknown person living in Connecticut.
yeah, I think that I think there still is education that needs to happen in the industry. But I think in the beginning there was a lot of educating surrounding influencers, best practices, platforms, what to post, when to post, how to post, content to post, etc. I think a lot of those best practices were what I liked about the quote beginning times. There seemed to be a lot of conferences dedicated to helping content creators create content. So, back then, any like the conferences were really all about helping content creators create their content. So we were, very thick into it. And so we did a lot of time educating our clients as to what the best practices were. We did a lot of education with the influencers themselves on how to create content, what to create, etc.
Yeah. And that educational piece, do you think that, it evolves with time and as like the influencer stage changes? Or do you think there is a foundational aspect of it that has continued to grow, since the inception of
Yeah, I think
influencer
there's
marketing?
definitely a foundational aspect that just continues to grow.
Yeah, totally. So, what do you think has been the most significant from Twitter parties through moving and through Instagram? And I mean, obviously, like video, like continues to be king, across any type of marketing. But what are the things? And maybe this is something that we don't know from the outside in. And myself coming from marketing, influencer marketing is not necessarily a channel that I have been focused on, but what have you seen to be the main sort of like changes moving from Twitter party into, circa today, like where we are today with influencer marketing?
Yeah, I think that, where we are, like what today, if I was looking at it today, I feel that consumers are really bombarded with content, right? I feel that right now the focus for 2025 is going to be a continued authentic storytelling and also share of voice and shareability of that voice. Those are going to be really key because there is so much content out there.
Yeah. And so in terms of, I like that you say that, like the share of voice, because really it's like it's getting a piece of the pie, right? I mean, it's like,
Yeah,
when somebody launches a business, you're going to have a competitor, right? But there's going to be a share of a voice that you're going to connect with. It doesn't necessarily mean that X influencer who probably influences the same kind of industry, cannot have a huge following like their competitor can, because it's the resonation of these type of influencers across a multitude of different audiences, correct?
correct. That's what
Yeah.
I think. Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's so interesting because, I think it leaves room to kind of expand and grow, like, especially as we talk about, you've worked for a lot of big brands, right? So, I mean, those brands pretty much have the world as like their ICP, so like their ideal customer profile, but still there is layers to their customer profile that are unique in its own matter, that are also relatable from a cultural standpoint.
Yep. I agree. I agree.
Yeah. How does that sort of, expand on the way in which you work with clients, and like kind of like how the briefs come in through the funnel? What are certain criterias that they look for? And I'm sure a lot of the times they think they know what they're looking for, but then you kind of like help to tweak that to support, their growth in that aspect.
Yeah, I feel, for us anyway, you know, when you know, when you're working with influencers, I feel that, don't there's a few things that I always talk to brands about. You know, it's not, do your research. Thoroughly research your potential influencers to ensure that they really authentically align with your brand or your cause or your messaging, right? And then another thing that I like to talk to brands about is provide creative freedom. That opens up a host of other things that we could talk about maybe on a different podcast, but you want to allow influencers the creative freedom to create content that really resonates with their audience, right? You don't want to have an overly scripted brief for them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And that's a lot of education too. That's where the education comes in with the brands, especially if they're just stepping or into influencer marketing, or if they're relatively new within influencer marketing. So it's giving them, some guardrails, but letting them be creative and get that message across how they think will fit with their audience.
mm-hmm.
And then I also think that a lot of brands, I want to tell them to establish key performance metrics upfront, right? Don't just throw money at it. Establish what the KPIs are right up front at the beginning. What are you looking for? What are the goals? Are you trying to increase website traffic, awareness, referral visits, downloads, etc.? And then you want to, as you're going along in the campaign, you really want to monitor and analyze performance and be ready to pivot. Like if you're working with someone and that messaging just isn't working, or if the content just isn't working on one platform, be prepared to pivot and pivot quickly. I think those are some of the things that we talk to our brand clients about.
Yeah, because I do want to dig into that a little bit. I think across the board, as it relates to like KPIs, as you mentioned, like key performance indicators, it's important that brands know what they are, align themselves with it, because a lot of the times when they're not, they can look at a channel that they've, maybe just thrown money at, or they've quote unquote tested, but haven't done the test in a manner that you can look at it from a scale of success, right? Because
Right.
even if you say KPIs, a converted lead is obviously the ultimate success. But there's
Exactly.
but there's many different types of successes that you can look at, like downloads could be one, or
Website
commentary,
visits, new
engagement.
website visits.
Exactly. Yeah, new website visits and all of that. I think that do you sometimes help brands establish that to make sure that you're being set up for success?
Yes, we do have strategy calls with our brand clients to really flesh that out in the beginning, because I want to make sure that we're not over promising something that they're looking for that we don't know what they're looking for. So it's really good to have that open communication to establish those performance objectives up front. Another couple of things that I tell my clients are, when you're looking for influencers, don't prioritize follower count. A lot of brands, when they're initially getting into influencer marketing, they're looking at the big, celebrity type, maybe not even celebrity, but, the larger influencers with, millions of following. Just avoid selecting influencers solely based on their follower count. You really want to focus on authenticity, and it's really important in 2025 for that share of voice.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you because a lot of the times, us as marketers in any type of channels, there are sometimes issues and instances where, a client will come, they're just like, okay, I have this budget, I want to start testing. And I think it's in our diligence to not to educate them and to make sure that both sides are being set up for success, because otherwise we don't want something to fail at the end of the day, but we also want them to understand that there's a testing phase too, correct?
Right. My ultimate goal is I want the brand to be successful. I want them to come back. I want them to be a long-term client. And that won't happen if we don't establish clear KPIs and what's expected of us at the outset.
Yeah. Have you ever had an instance where you've kind of walked a client through that and then all of a sudden they're like, okay, maybe this isn't for us?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think a lot of most definitely, I feel some brands are very interested in affiliate marketing where they don't want to pay the influencers like a base fee. They'd rather just do some form of an affiliate or commission structure. And I'm not a firm believer in that. That's just not how I operate. So when, sometimes when I've spoken to clients in the past, if that's what if that's what their sole KPI is going to be sales, then I'm not so sure that we would be the right agency.
yeah. No, I love that because, sometimes there's a lot of agencies that come on and they're like, yeah, they'll sort of take anybody, kind of move through the system and then you become a dime a dozen, but that's so important. And not onboarding call, that sort of introduction call.
Yeah, it's the introductory call, who we are and what we provide. And, we don't do affiliate marketing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love that you said, don't prioritize follower count.
Mm.
So tell us a little bit about how and who you guys have within your roster and, how you kind of match, because it really is a matching game, how you match influencers with brands and so on.
Yeah. So I want to just clarify from the outset that we are not a talent management company. So we don't represent influencers. Now, there are a lot of other agencies that do have an agency model and they have influencers within their agency. But then there are agencies like us who don't represent talent, who actually source their talent from different places. So one of the main places we source our talent from um, is a platform called Creator IQ, and there are many platforms like that in the industry where a brand or an agency basically gets seats to per month, and they pay a monthly fee to use the platform to source influencers, right? And
Yeah.
there are so many platforms out there that do this. So, and we also, so that's like a baseline of sourcing influencers. We use a platform to help us source. However, that's really just the baseline. We have our internal research team who really does, once we get that baseline, it spits out all these influencers, hundreds of influencers. Then we have our research team really dig in to the content. What's the content like? Is it high quality? Do they have bots following them? What style do they have? Is it get ready with me? Is it blogging, etc.? What style content is it? Is it going to fit with the brand? Does it resonate? Are they brand safe? So there's so many, filters that we go through. The starting place is using a platform. So the distinction in the industry is that you have talent managers who do have that roster, and we rely heavily on our relationships in the industry as well. So we don't just use a platform; we rely on our talent managers as well.
Yeah, I mean that's great because I think a lot of the times, I mean, I would say even just like 7 years ago, we would look at because they were bucketed, right? I mean, it was like bucketed into like micro,
Oh
macro,
yeah,
size,
nano
nano.
influencers, micro influencers, mid tier, macro, and celebrity. They're still
Yeah,
kind of They're still bucketed in that way.
yeah,
Um, they're bucketed in that way for a few different reasons, but one of the reasons they're bucketed that way is by follower count to sometimes get a baseline of the rate. Um, Going into influencer rates is a whole different topic, and follower counts is just really like scratching the surface.
yeah. And in that sense, I think tying that into no matter where you are, like within your business, so whether you're a small business owner, or let me take a step back. Do you have a cutoff in terms of who you work with? Do you only work with big brands? Is it because you think that influencer marketing, has an opportunity in that space versus somebody who may be a tech startup or somebody who may be a smaller business? And I'm
Yeah.
talking like, let's go down to like a hair salon, right? But, maybe they have a few, thousand followers, but, they're looking to gain an audience in somewhere else. Is it actually affordable for somebody to utilize the influencer space, or are you only suggesting that enterprise has the opportunity to really succeed in this channel?
So I feel like I want to understand the question. So if you're talking just about our agency, we do have a minimum threshold of the type of brands that we will take, a minimum dollar threshold. But if you're talking about, can smaller brands tap this industry? Yes, most certainly they can.
Yeah.
You don't have to have, a $200,000 budget to tap the influencer space.
Yeah.
You just have to tap it smarter.
Yes. Yes. We'll expand on that actually, because I think that a lot of people fear to walk down into this space, but it's what you had mentioned earlier. It's like it's doing it smarter. So like maybe give
Doing
us
it
some pointers, yeah, in
Yeah.
terms
So
of.
if I was a small business and I was coming out with, say, a clothing line or something like that, um, I would, and you probably don't have the money to get one of these platforms to search influencers, right? Because they are expensive. Um, and you have to sign up for a full year. So that's probably not something that a smaller brand is going to do. So what they're going to do probably is just
Yeah.
search on Instagram and search on TikTok via hashtag and or via scrolling, right? That's basically how they're going to search. And then they're probably keeping spreadsheets of different influencers that they like. Um, One way that, they just do searching, via hashtag.
Yeah.
Um, SEO, or sometimes maybe if you're searching via SEO, actually just Google, and you're looking, sometimes you'll have different agencies, the top 20 beauty influencers, the top 20 Black creators to follow. So sometimes you'll see a lot of different lists that you can follow as a small business. Um, and if I was a small business, I would probably be reaching out to more local influencers that are highly targeted to my audience, like fashion. What specific type of fashion is it? Bathing suits? Is it apparel? Is it purses, etc.? I would try and find those influencers who focus specifically on that one product per se, maybe not all of it, but
Hmm.
within the, fashion. And then I would if and then I would offer them product,
Yeah.
people say that like gifting is out, I've heard some people say that, but I don't think it's totally out. It really depends upon the level of influencer and the product that you're gifting. I do work with a couple of influencers, and there's some products that they just love because it's such high quality,
Yeah.
and they're not asking to get paid for it just because they love the product.
Right.
Now, so, as they get bigger, like, they probably will want to get paid for it. But the smaller influencers who are just trying to like dip their toes into this whole space and to get known, they will do gifted collabs. They
Yeah.
will do those gifted collaborations for product.
Yeah. No, I like that.
Maybe, and maybe, depending upon how big the influencer is, you may have to pay them something, right? Because they are doing work, they are producing it. It depends really on what the deliverables are for the brand. But maybe there is some form of payment. I always like to think that you are paying for the production as well, and if the brand is going to use the content past, just organic sharing, then I do highly suggest that the brand pay for the content.
Yeah. And I do like how you mentioned, potentially tapping into the local audience, because like what I always like to tell my clients, specifically if they're just starting out, it's this concept of like win local to grow nationally.
Right.
And then if your goal is to also go globally, but it's if you haven't won your local market, then it becomes harder to win a national market.
It's even for like businesses like us, right? It's really about networking within who's in your network, right? Who's
Right.
in your most immediate network, who's in your most local immediate network that you can network with.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I love that. I love that. So tell us a little bit about, as you were talking about, the sort of the trends that are happening in 2025. What do
Yeah.
you see that are, let's just say maybe it's an enterprise, maybe it's a mid-sized company, maybe it's a small company, but I think we can all borrow from each other and kind of tweak just based on, size of market and so on and so forth. But what are the main sort of goals, or not necessarily goals, but trends in essence to look out for,
Mhm.
as it relates to wanting to tap into influencer marketing if this is something new?
Yeah, yeah. So I think for 2025, I'm seeing a lot of uh, different tent poles shaping up.
Mhm.
I think both brands and creators need to really adapt quickly to shifting consumer behaviors, platform changes, as you know, TikTok, and also emerging technologies. So the first one is they really need to diversify beyond TikTok. And I think with the pause of TikTok, everybody right now is scrambling, not scrambling, but they are trying to figure out what other platforms should they be on.
Yeah.
And if you're a brand working with creators, or if you're a brand on different platforms, with the uncertainty that's happening around TikTok in its future, I feel that they should be on, definitely Instagram. They're probably most likely already on Instagram, but Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, uh, long form and short form content. And then even LinkedIn is getting really, really big, not only for B2B creators, but just for creators in general.
Yeah.
So it's the opportunity for creators who build audiences across multiple platforms and multiple touch points will be more resilient to any shifts that might happen with these different platforms.
Yeah.
So that's one, diversification. Number two is AI powered influencer campaigns. We can dig into that right after I get over the trends that I'm seeing, because that one we can unpack a little bit more. I'm also seeing like long-term partnerships over one-off deals. However, then you also get into exclusivity, which can increase the price of, influencer partnerships.
Hmm.
Four, I'm seeing the rise of micro communities, and there I'm thinking about, smaller, highly engaged audiences that are providing more value than the mass reach. So I'm thinking about your Substack, your Threads, maybe your more niche live selling platforms that are starting to pop up. And then number five, I do believe that we're going to see a growth of live shopping and social commerce.
Hmm. Hmm.
That is getting big. And then I do think that LinkedIn is going to keep expanding.
Yes.
And I do think we're going to see more creators join the platform, more integrations potentially on LinkedIn. Um, I never, you know, I joined LinkedIn a long time ago, so this has actually changed quite a bit. So,
Yeah.
and lastly, I do think that sustainability and ethical partnerships matter now more than ever.
Yeah.
Um, I think consumers are holding brands and influencers accountable, not only for their environment, but social impact. So I still think you're going to see that. I still think you're going to see where consumers are going to want to see what that brand cause is, what they support, what the influencers support. Um, and I think those are going to be key. So those are my trends that I see happening.
Yeah. I love that. I do want to unpack the live shopping, the AI, and the micro communities, but I think let's dive in a little bit to micro communities, because I think there was an interesting trend that happened post COVID, where I believe that really these communities started to build and become stronger. I think that there was always a sense of needing trust before I purchase, and the concept of like the younger generation like wanting to connect with your brand. So then a lot of like companies were going after, okay, what's our like triple bottom line? How do we give back? to our communities, or how do we support XYZ, regardless of what that
Right.
was, right? But I
Hmm.
think ever since COVID, there really became this sense of like togetherness, that really brands can jump into and tap into a variety of different communities, whoever, maybe there's an influencer that's managing that, or maybe it's like, a LinkedIn community and so on and so forth. So let's unpack that a little bit, because I think it's important, because I personally think it's becoming a new avenue for marketing, right? And a lot of people haven't really jumped onto that bandwagon yet.
No, I think, for instance, I do think like when we're talking about these smaller micro communities, I'm thinking like Threads,
Yes.
Substack, Discord, Reddit, um, etc.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and maybe also even, smaller events hosted by the influencers themselves, right? But I feel these smaller micro communities will really play a bigger role um, in 2025, definitely 2026.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. So let's dive in a little bit, because I want to leave AI to the last,
Okay.
question. But live shopping, you and I, when we originally connected, we did talk about how internationally live shopping was something that was really working. I mean, obviously we have our, what was on like TV and has been there forever, since like the
QVC.
70s, QVC. So
Yeah.
yeah, so QVC was like huge, like probably back in like, our grandparents' time,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit in my time. I remember I was in college and I watched things from QVC. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie, 3 o'clock in
Yeah.
the morning, maybe I'm up. It's a Saturday night. I was watching a movie with friends and QVC comes on. I'm like, oh, that could be an interesting thing. It was almost like the Amazon back then, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But then it kind of took I wouldn't say a nosedive. It kind of like tapered off a little
Yeah.
bit. Like,
Tapered off. And
mhm,
then, you know, I feel, well, for so TikTok came into the marketplace here like 2019, I want to say 20, late 2018, 2019. So their parent company has they have had live selling for years now in China.
yeah.
It's just very culturally different. Um, it's very culturally driven.
Hmm.
It's almost like people have it on their calendars as to when they're going to go watch a specific live stream. It becomes very ingrained. It's like it's something that you go to. It is because you've got to get there. There's going to be sales. It's very driven by, okay, you've got to get there, and you got to tune into it. Whereas here in the United States, we've been slower to adapt to it. I feel culturally shopping is just a different experience here. I think
Yes.
that we're changing based upon the whole influencer space and TikTok live shop and etc. But we're not quite there, but I think this year is going to be really big. So brands have been hesitant, I think, up until now to really tap into it. There have been a few brands that have tapped into it like last year, but I do think that this year more brands will be getting into the live shopping.
Hmm.
And I think there's going to be a lot of different apps and platforms that start developing to host these different communities. And what I see, and I don't know, maybe it's going to be there's going to be an app for food, or there's going to be an app for fashion. So, or a platform, and then people will tune in to this specific platform at a specific time to see their favorite, influencer do live streaming. So it comes down to the influencer. So this is why it's really important that the influencer is very authentic and has a big, huge connection with their audience, because if they're going to live stream and be successful, not only for themselves, but for the brand, they have to have that connection that people are going to want to tune in to their live.
Yeah.
One thing I did note that when TikTok took a pause, what I noticed was people were starting to go to everybody's live stream because they really miss that live interaction that TikTok provides.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's true. And I do see an uptick in it because also, there's also this cross culture that's happening. I mean, in specific in the beauty industry, like everybody is going wild and has been going wild for like the Korean,
Oh,
seven
Korean
step
skincare.
beauty, right?
Hmm.
Or, Korean makeup and all that kind of stuff. And like I had an influencer that's in Korea now and she's posting and I'm like, oh my God, I want these
I
brands.
want it.
Yeah. And then it's like, I want this makeup. And it's like, they've also really hit the nail on the head with like creating Amazon shops, like for that, like to happen. Like they're switched on, they're fast because they know that our market is going to catch on, right? Versus I
Exactly.
think sometimes we kind of, we don't really necessarily put the chicken before the egg, but it is almost like that where we learn and then we take a step back versus they just do.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And it's just a cultural shift, like in the United States, like shopping is much more individual, right? Like it's much more like individual where you go, we used to always go to, retail, stores, um, brick and mortar, now we've switched to online more. But this, live shopping is more about driving to something, right? And culturally, we're getting there, but it's going to be a process through this year, I think. I think
Yeah.
as more and more brands tap into it, it's going to slowly start to shift.
Yeah, to pick on. It's almost like when you and I were having this conversation, we talked about how QR codes were big in
Right.
Asia
Right.
and have always been. And then it wasn't until we had a national disaster or like a global disaster that QR codes just flew here all of a sudden.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see the dynamics and the shifts culturally. So AI, I
Yeah.
know, I know it's almost like, oh my gosh, are we going to talk about AI again? Like, with everyone and like just the space because it's loud, it's here to stay. It's, how are things moving? I mean, as a marketer, like some clients that I have, they're like, oh, let's just tap into like one of these, AI platforms and I'll just film myself and then we can just push out a bunch of videos, where
Well,
it's like, I don't have to constantly be doing them. And
mhm.
I'd love to like understand your thought process around this because even though you're in like the influencer space, like video is still very understood from your angle from a social standpoint. And I think it's great. The support, let's talk about the support and let's talk about how we're not there yet in so many different instances.
Yeah, I feel that AI is being used in the influencer space more and more, not only to find, the AI is being incorporated into all the different platforms I talked about previously, right? They are incorporating AI into influencer discovery. So, but it's also being used to predict performance and also to even generate campaign content. I think we can expect to see more AI assisted content creation, such as like, I think creators are using it now for helping them with scripts, helping them with captions, helping them with video editing. So I do think that creators are using AI assisted content creation tools right now.
Mhm.
I think the watch out is, for me anyway, while AI really does offer, some opportunities, um, I think it presents some legal challenges. And I feel that both brands and influencers should exercise caution, ensuring compliance with not only disclosure requirements, disclosing that you are using AI, but also intellectual property rights, like what is in the AI that you're using, and also data privacy laws to mitigate any potential legal risks. So, we've been talking to our entertainment attorney and figuring out what we should include in our contracts. What should we have in our contracts, especially if we're working with influencers. We want them to disclose whether or not they're using AI and how they're using it. So we know for the brand that if the brand is going to use this content, that it's free and clear of any legal ramifications on the back end.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up because I don't think there has been enough focus on the legal ramifications because it's the unknown a little bit, right?
It is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like we're swimming in waters where we know, okay, it's going in this direction, but so like something may come up.
Right. Mhm.
Yeah. And we need to be aware, we need to like pre-plan and prepare for that.
Right.
Very interesting. So what do you think brands do wrong versus do right when it comes to influencer marketing?
I think they're getting away from this, but I think for the longest time they've always been focused on follower count
Yeah.
and working with the largest influencer they can.
Yeah. Yeah, and I honestly like I love that you have kept bringing that up because I think the growth of somebody's Instagram account is taking so much longer today
Oh yeah.
versus what it did in the past, and the algorithms are changing so much and rapidly that I think it's almost like if you influence one person a day, then I feel like you're doing your job in so
Right.
many instances, right? So
Yep. Yep.
yeah, especially depending on like the cost per kind of value of like that influencer converting somebody, maybe a handful of people is all that's what's needed. It's not hundreds of thousands of people, right? So
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
I
Yep.
love that. Well, last but not least, Paula, what are key pieces of advice that you could give somebody just actually tapping into this industry and things that they need to be thinking about
From a creator's perspective or
from a client's perspective?
from a brand perspective?
Yes.
Um, there's so many things I could
Yeah.
think about.
If there's more than three, I don't mind.
I feel okay. So I think I would go back to, you know, don't focus solely on follower count.
Yeah.
Do your research and research potential influencers that align with your brand's values and ethos.
Yes.
And then, two, when you're working with influencers, like I said, allow creative freedom. And I know that seems like you could lose control, but the best content I've seen has been when a brand has loosened the reins a little bit and gave them just some guardrails, and the influencer was free to create the content however they deemed would work the best for their audience.
Yeah.
And then I think the third would be to establish KPIs upfront, like we spoke about. And then four would be to monitor the campaign's performance and be able to pivot quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And test
Those
and
four
learn,
things.
right?
Yep.
Testing and learning so you know that you're getting the
Test
right
and
content with the
test
right
and learn.
fist.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a constant in any type of marketing platform that you use. So,
It is. It
yeah.
is.
Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful, Paula. So informative. Especially, if it's an unknown world and because I think it's been changing so rapidly and I think the industry space of like influencer just exponentially growing and
Right.
I for one, a majority of my feed is influencers and businesses and news, right? But I think, you know, it's funny because companies starting like an Instagram account or a like a TikTok account, if they're not providing substantial value, it's almost like why would you follow the brand, right?
Right.
So
Right.
tapping into like an influencer can further help support creating that content to really help you stand out, especially in the B2B space, right?
Especially. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
especially in the B2B
Love
space.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This has been wonderful, Paula. I look forward to having you on and digging into other subjects as we move through 2025. So appreciate your time and
Appreciate this too. It's been
yeah,
great chatting with you.
yeah, likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.